Um, you mentioned guest-host relationships in the film, so I guess I want to say welcome to Toronto. Toronto is a big film and video festival city. Last count, I think there's something like 60 or 70 film festivals that happen every year. So I hope that you feel that your film here is a good context. Just out of curiosity to begin with, if I understand correctly, the film is dated 1391, 2012. Is the 1391 the Islamic calendar year? Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, great. I was curious about that.
It's called actually the Iranian calendar.
Oh, it's called the Iranian calendar. Okay. It seems to me that as an art project, there are at least three, maybe more kind of components. It seems like kind of your pilgrimage to Kabul and to find the hotel is one of the elements. The installation that you had in Castle and maybe other subsequent gallery exhibitions would be another element. And then the film that we have here is another. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, I mean I've been researching the story of Boetti in Kabul for a long time, maybe 7 or 8 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. And throughout that time, I've made a number of works. So really, when the idea of doing something, I mean, actually, when I finished the piece that was part of the main, let's say for me, it was the main piece in the Documenta in the museum display, I thought I could not do anything else. But then Caroline came and I said, well, why don't we just go to Kabul and see what happens? So we went there, and this film it's sort of the sort of what came out of that first trip to Afghanistan, and then consequently several others. But so there's many sort of reiterations of how I was sort of discovering things and sort of trying to adapt them into what I could say with them, or what could I use them to say. So that's why there's a number of things. And then so just to create a little bit of a context, this piece is the last thing I've done. I hope it's the last piece I've done. I will do about Boetti, and was part of Documenta, but was mainly shown in Kabul. It was a part of the exhibition was happened in Kabul, and this was installed there as an installation. And in Castle, I display a number of works, and not only that, but I mean a few works of mine. One that is an hour length, sort of kind of essay slideshow about the same theme, and then I displayed also a piece of Boetti, because when Boetti first did the work of him that is called the Mappa, that became actually quite. He did a very long series of works, which are embroideries of a world map, but the first one he did was actually at some point considered, or strongly considered, to be shown in Documenta, but for reasons that are unknown, it actually never happened. So part of my idea in the show was to bring finally the Boetti Mappa, and with that sort of create some kind of context for my own research 30 years after or something.
Mm-hmm. So from the film, it implies that you stayed in the same building as the hotel. Did you stay there for like a year? Because there seemed to be kind of change of seasons and things like that.
Yeah, it was important for me to create that fiction. I mean, we were shooting material for a whole year, or a little bit less than a year. But I was actually going back and forth. I mean, at the end, I did 4 trips to Afghanistan. I had somebody. I mean, the first time was just to know, sort of, to realize what was Kabul, what was Afghanistan. Then it sort of started to take, sort of the idea started to take shape. The first thing we wanted to do was actually to buy the building, because I was very excited to just realize that actually it existed. I mean, we knew that it existed, but it was really great to see it. And then it became kind of problematic to think, what will this become, like this kind of permanent monument, which doesn't really make sense. And anyway, so there were a number of stages through it, but we, from more or less from the beginning, I had somebody shoot stuff. So from the beginning that we started sort of taking care of the house, we took care of the house for more or less than a year. We started documenting what we were doing, but I was not there all the time. I was kind of back and forth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And were there renovations done? Because there's a scene where you see the men working in the garden and doing the planting, and then somebody kind of doing something with the windows. Did your project entail kind of renovating the house, the garden, and things like that?
Yeah, I mean the film. I mean the film is in a way, in a very basic form. The film is a documentation of an art gesture. Right? I think I sort of, when I see it, I feel like I've done a film, but in a way, it really comes from sort of an extension of the idea of an artist's documentation of a gesture. And for me, that gesture was that sort of just the taking care of a space for a limited time of time. So yeah, for me that sort of that moment or those months of taking care of a place was it's kind of the core of the piece, let's say, regardless of all the stories and too much talking.
I mean, it's really beautiful. I think that the film begins with a discussion about the roles of museums, and the opening of, what was it, Pape? Mm-hmm. The Pape Museum. And so there's something kind of museological in this artistic gesture that you're talking about, in terms of preserving an object, taking care of something, so that the stories associated with it and the experiences associated with it can have a future life. Do you see it in kind of these museological terms as broader project?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the idea of taking care of something or putting attention to something, it definitely, I think the idea with that sort of to make it somehow an abstract relationship between those ideas, the museum and the taking care, was to create that, to sort of think that taking care means telling people that it's important for you, and at the same time being clear that that was a temporary gesture. So in a way, it's kind of trying to turn that space into some kind of museological object, but just as a temporary thing. So that all that kind of, I think that negotiation of how to acknowledge that there is something important about this building, for me, is important to acknowledge it, and at the same time not turn it into a monument. And that's why we kind of dropped the idea of buying it and taking it forever.
Mm-hmm. There was a moment in the film where you said that a story only happens once. And it seemed to me kind of striking, because it seems that, in a way, a story has to happen more than once for it to be a story. And a kind of, in a way, this whole concern on kind of preserving something, perpetuating something, has this kind of reiterative quality of storytelling itself. So anyway, I just think that there's something very interesting, but accurate, I think, in your film, when you said that what you're preserving is not the original thing. You're actually creating a new thing through this act of preserving. So I think I understand kind of the uniqueness of the moment, that you can't pretend to perpetuate.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was very clear when I mean, I had been researching it for so long, and I've more or less I've done this kind of thing of looking for a space where something to me important happened, and when you experience that, most of the time it's kind of a very strange feeling, because there is a certain nice feeling about finding something, but then also there's a certain disappointment to it, because then you see what is this? I mean, this is just a house like any other house in the world. I mean, what am I doing? Like traveling and making this effort to come to Afghanistan to something that more or less there's nothing. I mean, there's nothing of Boetti there. So in a way, it was very important for me to what you, I think what you just said is very accurate, and I mean I think it represents that sort of struggle in sort of in one side sort of trying to rationalize or to figure out what am I doing and why am I doing this sort of apparently big effort to get there, and on the other side sort of. I don't know. I think I forgot what I was going to say.
No, it makes sense. I think there's something so intriguing too with Boetti himself as a figure and as an artist. You know, that he started calling himself Alighiero Boetti, you know, so like he kind of split his name or his identity into two. You know, it'd be like me starting to call myself Louis and Jacob. So kind of making myself into two people. And there's this kind of act of reiteration or kind of repetition that seems like your pilgrimage is also a kind of repetition or following in the footsteps of somebody else that you've never met, you know, that happened long ago in a different time and place and for different reasons. But in a way, you're kind of retracing somebody else's movements. Do you recognize an affinity of yourself as an artist with Boetti as an artist? Like, what's the nature of that repetition for you?
Yeah, let me finish first. Right, and now I remember, and I think some more or less it's related to what you're saying. Anyway, I mean the sort of the disappointment feeling of finding something. It's also related to the fact that, and that's why I said that the stories only happen once, because basically when I got there, you realize that the context where this story happened is way more interesting than what you've been told or what you've read or whatever. So really, for me, that was very important to sort of think, wait, actually, I mean, there's a whole other story, even though it's the same thing. For me, sort of, at the moment that I actually reached that, it became a whole different story, even though I was following somebody's path. By the time you get there, it actually just becomes some other journey. And then you realize, then the story starts splitting, because then there is my story and the story that happens all around there, and with the excuse of that other story that actually is not there. I didn't find it in a way. And but yeah, I mean to say that, and then yeah, I don't feel like, I mean, I've after a number of years, I feel like I've learned a lot from Boetti's work and Boetti's attitudes towards art. But in a way, I was I mean, there's many reasons why I've been. I mean, I think I've been very interested in the story because it's a very enigmatic story, something that happened somewhere else. But in a sort of broader range, I think I'm very interested in more about sort of how those kind of stories are constructed in our history and how those are distributed and read, and what happened, why Boetti was so jealous about telling that story, or why there's so many little pictures about it, or what, you know, how that sort of mythology is created, and less so about his work. I was just interested about this story that he had created somehow.
Okay, I see. And I mean, you described it as kind of, he had this desire for a place that was far away. You know, like when he saw the Paul Klee drawing, it kind of from Morocco, it suggested to him like something far away. And you also talked about that in your experience in your hometown. Where's the museum in Pape?
It's called Monclova, my hometown.
Monclova?
It's there, yeah.
Okay. You know, you described this experience of being a young person and attending the museum and seeing the works there, but also this kind of experience that you were only a spectator, that kind of art was happening somewhere else. So there's this similar experience of kind of a remoteness that's calling, or that's creating a kind of enigmatic space for you. Where do you think that this sense of kind of this remoteness that's calling comes from for you? Like,
yeah, I mean, there's many instances, but I mean, the museum story for me was very clear when I started to. I mean, I think for me was how do I say it? I think, yeah, in a way, I always felt from the beginning, museums are most of the time this kind of strong structure where you enter and you're told things, most of the time, and I always felt like that, that we were never the participants. There was always there was something, everything that was happening there was always implied the importance of it, but it always came from somewhere else. And in a way, that sort of started. I mean, I only started thinking about this lately, but trying to understand why psychologically. That I think and we can talk for an hour more about that. But I think in a way, this film really made me sort of analyze myself in a different way. I think, and in that sense, I started to look why I'm interested in something that is not happening right now, or why I'm sort of taken by these kind of stories. I don't know if that answers.
I mean, I think in a way, even leaving aside like psychological questions, I think that there's a kind of, living in the Americas as kind of colonial countries like Canada or Mexico, the colonial experience does have built in the experience that kind of the real thing is happening over there, right? It's always somewhere else. So I imagine there are many kind of things that contribute to this sense.
I just wanted to thank for giving us a different look about Kabul and Afghanistan. It's very refreshing to see that part of the world in the artistic light, and just because I think the media today really shows this, that the images of violence, what's left after the war, and everything is a reminder of that. And just to see that in this poetic, artistic way is very refreshing. So I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. It was very important for me to portray something different than of course when you go there, it's you go with all these images that you've seen in the media, and then when you get there, you realize that they're so far away from reality, and that it's a beautiful country, and it's with beautiful people, and you can have a very more or less normal life there, and people have to live with that thing about something could happen, but in a way people try as much as we do to have a normal life. So that was very important to portray it in a way.
I thank you again for that film. It's I love the scene in the paint store. I thought that was quite fantastic. But I had a question. What's the relationship between the list at the beginning and the list at the end?
Yeah. Well, both are, for me, it was very important to create some kind of parallel about. Well, actually, the fact that I was more scared of going to certain towns in Mexico than actually going to Afghanistan. And I wanted to kind of frame the whole story, sort of acknowledging the sort of type of violence that is happening in both places. And so the first radio thing, it's something quite particular. I think I was told that no other country, at least in the region, do that. And it's the fact that every time somebody dies, they don't just say the name of the person who died, but they actually mention all the families or the close relatives to that person. And that's what it was. And the last was just the day I was finished editing, and then I just got the news and had somebody read them in Mexico.
Thank you. But I'm wondering whatever happened to the place itself. What became of the place?
We return it to the owner. I don't know what's happening really. I know that the day that the Documenta exhibition finished, we released that was the end date of the contract. So we just return it to the owner, which is quite it's quite complicated because we actually never, even though we signed a contract, we never actually met the owner, and everything is very sketchy in those terms. So it's really difficult to understand what will happen. It's really strange why the building was actually there when in any sort of real estate business it will have been torn a long time ago, and but somehow it's there, and somehow probably there's some kind of sketchy thing about who actually owns it. And in that situation, in a war situation, is really difficult. There's no documentation of anything. The country was flown by a lot of people, so there's a lot of uncertainty in that sense. So I don't know what will happen really. But I wish the idea was that it will actually continue its own life. I didn't want to disturb it anymore.
I guess being human, I understand your fascination with wanting what you can't have and nostalgia. But I'm curious about your fascination with Boetti and why he remained a starting point for this exploration for you.
Yeah, as I said, I was very taken by the story, that how it was constructed, and there was, for me, it's always been. I mean, in a way, it takes the Boetti as a starting point, but in a way, I feel like it's never really about Boetti. I think like every work that I've done around this story, for example, it's about something totally different. Actually, the first piece that I did, which was actually shown in Kassel this summer, it's a number of letters that I've written to Boetti, and it was actually, I mean, the sort of the impulse to actually do that piece was because I felt frustrated because I was living in the U.S. and there was the invasion of Afghanistan was happening at the time, so I kind of took it as an excuse to say something about that. So in a way, Boetti is an excuse, but it's also this kind of peripheral story happening around what I want to say, really.
Just sitting here, we noticed that both in the list, the very first list, that the names were mainly of men, male relatives, and also, too, that there were no women at all in the movie. Was this a cultural sort of experience in the sense that there was no interaction with women during the filming, or at any time none of the workers were women? It's just an observation.
Yeah, it's just like that. I mean, it's hard to judge why it's like that. I mean, of course, from Western perspective, it seems really strange. But in a way, when you go to Afghanistan, that's women are always somewhere else. I mean, they're not on the street. When they're on the street, they're covered, and although in the city of Kabul is quite different than in the towns. I mean, I speak of myself and the people who were there with Documenta. I mean, we interacted with a lot of students, for example, or people who are in the arts. But in the street, actually, that's what happens. You barely see women, and women are always, in any place they are separated. I mean, if you go to a restaurant, most of the time there's a specific place for women, things like that. So really, it's quite strange, and I wanted to portray it just as I saw it. But yeah, they're just never visible in a way, women. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Mario and Louis. I think that's going to conclude our time with them tonight, and thank you for your extraordinary film. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.